It all began when I heard Madame's voice calling from the back of the boutique. "Mademoiselle, excuse me, but I don't think you should be trying things on here if you have no intention of buying." I looked up just in time to see the girl turn around. A young, intelligent face and astonishingly calm. I had seen countless customers lose their temper with Genevieve, but this one didn't. "I do intend to buy, madam. I don't believe I've done anything wrong." Her voice was gentle but crystal clear. I remember I froze on the wooden steps between the two rooms, hesitating to enter. I had a feeling this wouldn't be a brief encounter. Genevieve smiled. That smile, the one I knew so well, the kind that didn't need to say, "I know who I am," because everyone else always remembered. "Do you even know how much that dress costs? I come here often. I know how to read people." I was ready to step in, prepared to diffuse the situation, but then the girl replied. And I have to admit, I had never heard a customer speak to Genevieve like that before. "I don't believe clothes were made to classify people. And I don't believe you've been authorized to put a price on someone else's self-worth." Silence. One nearby customer inhaled sharply, a small sound, but it rang like a bell in the sudden stillness. Genevieve raised an eyebrow. She wasn't used to being spoken to like that. But she wasn't done yet. She turned directly to me. "Madame Lefebvre, I asked that you check this girl's bag. I suspect she may have been inappropriate." I remember that moment with absolute clarity. Tom seemed to stop. I saw Isabelle, I know her name now, standing still, not startled, not defensive. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said. "But if it helps put everyone at ease." I can't quite explain what that moment felt like, being caught between a long-time client and a young woman who'd only visited a few times. But somehow in that instant I saw more clearly than ever who was truly being tested. And I realized some things aren't written in the shop manual, but they are still the right thing to do. Paris, an October afternoon. Golden leaves drifted gently along the cobblestone pavement of the Champs-Élysées, where footsteps usually belong to the busy, the stylish, or both. Pale sunlight filtered through the towering glass facade of Maison Eclat, a high-fashion boutique, casting reflections onto the polished white floor where every step seemed to leave behind a trace of pride. The soft chime of the door sounded as a young girl stepped inside. She wore a pale beige trench coat, her long curly hair tied back with a silk ribbon. Her face held a clarity that was far from naive, the kind of beauty shaped by learning how to stand tall beneath judgmental gazes. Her name was Isabelle Laurent, 16 years old, only daughter of Etienne Laurent, one of Paris's most respected and successful entrepreneurs, founder of the fashion empire Laurent Maison, of which Maison Eclat was the jewel in its crown. But today, Isabelle was not here as someone's daughter. Today, she came simply as a young woman choosing a dress for the first charity gala she'd been invited to, entirely on her own. No chaperone, no private driver, just herself like any other young person. No one recognized her, and Isabelle didn't need them to. Inside the store, the air seemed filtered through velvet. Soft piano music played, staff in black suits moved with quiet precision, and customers murmured as though every word might wrinkle the fabrics on display. Isabelle's eyes drifted over the dresses, from flowing chiffons to sleek satin gowns, from timeless neutrals to bold royal purples. She paused before a sea-green design with delicate hand-embroidered details down its length. Her fingers lightly brushed the fabric, and her eyes lit up with quiet delight. But across the room, someone was watching her with narrowed, frosty eyes. Madame Genevieve Moreau, a longtime patron of Maison Eclat, famed for her vintage taste and formidable presence, stood still for several seconds, lips pressed into a tight line. Her gaze remained fixed on Isabelle. To Genevieve, this girl, with her warm complexion and quiet, poised walk, didn't quite fit the image she expected in this refined space. "Children these days think a white blouse grants them access anywhere," she muttered, loudly enough for two nearby patrons to hear. Isabelle didn't seem to hear, or if she had, she chose not to respond. She walked toward the fitting room with the dress in hand, her steps steady but not confrontational. Every gesture had the grace of someone forged by many cold Parisian winters. Precise, elegant, and full of quiet strength. But Madame Moreau would not let it go. She frowned and moved toward a young sales associate, whispering something under her breath, her eyes still locked on the fitting room door that had just clicked shut. Isabelle stepped out of the fitting room. The sea-green dress hugged her slender frame perfectly. A subtle back slit and long lace sleeves lent it a beauty that was both modest and striking, Parisian to the core, where elegance always walked hand in hand with depth. She looked at herself in the full-length mirror, her eyes glowing with quiet satisfaction and a hint of surprise, not because the dress was beautiful, but because for the first time she felt ready to choose something she truly loved without needing anyone's approval. But the moment didn't last. From behind her, a sharp, commanding voice cut through the air. "Mademoiselle, I'm sorry, but I don't think you should be trying things on if you have no intention of buying." Isabelle turned. Standing before her was Madame Genevieve Moreau, silver hair swept into a chignon, a classic Chanel dress, and a deep brown Hermès bag held like a silent symbol of authority. No one in the boutique spoke. They didn't have to. The atmosphere thickened instantly. Isabelle wasn't surprised. But she did pause. Then she replied, calm and clear. "I do intend to buy, madam. I don't believe I've done anything wrong." Genevieve gave a tight smile. The smile of someone used to being listened to and used to being challenged. "Do you know how much that dress costs? I come here regularly and I know how to read people." Isabelle clenched her hand slightly. She could have fired back. But she chose differently. "I don't believe clothing was made to classify people. And I don't think you're authorized to determine someone else's self-worth." Someone nearby audibly inhaled. Genevieve raised an eyebrow, clearly unaccustomed to defiance. But she wasn't finished. She turned to the store manager, a woman in her 40s with a professional air but a face that betrayed her unease. "Madame Lefebvre, I insist you check this young lady's bag. I suspect inappropriate behavior." The moment the words left her mouth, the room held its breath. Isabelle froze. Other customers turned to look, some lowered their eyes, others subtly reached for their phones. "I haven't done anything wrong," Isabelle said, voice steady. "But if it will ease your minds." She opened her handbag in front of the store manager without hesitation. Madame Lefebvre glanced inside, a wallet, a phone, a leather notebook, and a charity gala invitation embossed with the Laurent Foundation's gold insignia. She recognized it instantly. It was a VVP pass reserved only for founding members or their immediate family. She swallowed hard and looked up at Isabelle. Her face paled. I apologize, mademoiselle." Isabelle gently took back her bag. "It's all right. I'm used to it." And just then, the glass doors opened. A man stepped in, tailored navy suit, silver-streaked hair swept back, eyes sharp but not unkind. He didn't speak, just looked across the room at the girls standing alone under warm lighting and a gallery of silent stares. Etienne Laurent. No introduction needed. Everyone knew who he was. Isabelle met his eyes. She didn't smile. Didn't say his name. Just a small nod, quiet, understanding. And Etienne walked toward his daughter, unhurried. Genevieve stepped back. Her lips pressed tightly. Her face looked as if it had just been slapped with cold water. Etienne glanced around. His voice rang out, not loud, but unmistakably clear. "I came to pick up my daughter. But it seems her shopping experience hasn't gone quite as expected." No one responded. Etienne turned to the store manager. "Madame Lefebvre, I trust today's incident will be reported in full to the board of this boutique chain. We'll be reviewing our training and customer service policies, especially in regard to young patrons." Madame Lefebvre nodded rapidly. Genevieve could now only bow her head. Etienne placed a hand gently on Isabelle's shoulder. "Did you find a dress?" Isabelle replied, her eyes still on Madame Moreau. "I believe I just did." And she walked to the checkout counter. 1 week after the incident at Belle du Soir, Isabelle Laurent stood in the grand atrium of the Laurent and Phil's headquarters in the Marais district of Paris. She wore a simple black dress, her hair neatly tied back, no makeup, her gaze as steady as the poise she had shown in that boutique. Around her, camera flashes pulsed, spotlights flickered, and the hum of anticipation filled the air. On a tall wooden podium, a silk banner was drawn down, revealing a hand-embroidered line in French. "L'élégance commence par le respect. Elegance begins with respect." Isabelle stepped slowly toward the microphone. The crowded room, filled with journalists and fashion insiders, fell silent. "I don't have a long speech," she began in French, her voice low but far-reaching because truth doesn't need embellishment. Several heads nodded in quiet agreement. "I don't need to be praised for refusing to stay silent. I only hope that one day no one will have to choose between silence and dignity." She paused, sweeping the room with her eyes. "Today, I'm not speaking as a customer. I'm speaking as a human being." At the back of the room stood Etienne Laurent, her father, chairman of the fashion house. He looked slightly older than the week before, but his eyes held a pride few had ever seen from him. Isabelle reached into an envelope and placed a printed memo on the podium. Starting next week, all Laurent and Phil's stores in France and abroad will launch the Respect and Presence initiative. Every employee, manager, and partner will be required to complete training on unconscious bias, inclusive service, and human-centered conduct. Applause followed, not loud, but deeply resonant. She continued, this time in English. Fashion isn't just fabric. It's what you wear when you step into the world. And this world, every day, should be dressed in respect. That afternoon on the Champs-Élysées, the boutique Belle du Soir stood quiet. Evelyn Marchand was nowhere in sight. A printed notice covered the window. Closed for internal restructuring. But in a side window, a single dress was displayed with care, the ivory gown Isabelle had chosen that day, suspended between two hand-stitched quotes. They asked me what I wore that day? I wore self-respect. I, Laurent. And just beneath, a small line of text. #respect is always in style. Paris had seen it. The world had too. And this time no one could look away. That evening, after the press conference, Isabelle Laurent stood alone on the rooftop balcony of the Laurent and Phil's headquarters. Below her, the golden lights of the Marais district shimmered, and in the distance, the Eiffel Tower sparkled against the Parisian night. A gentle breeze carried the scent of jasmine and wood smoke from nearby cafes. In her hand, a glass of red wine, untouched. She wasn't thinking of the silence of bystanders, but of the silence within herself, the kind that follows a storm. Behind her, the door opened. Etienne Laurent stepped out, his posture slower now, but still steady. No longer the famed leader of an empire, just a father, seeing his daughter not through expectation, but admiration, perhaps for the first time in years. Isabelle, he said softly. You knew this had been building for a long time, she replied, still facing the city. I just turned on the light. Etienne stood beside her, silent for a moment. Then he said quietly. You didn't just turn on the light. You rebuilt the room. She turned to look at him. And for the first time, the gaze of two generations of the Laurent family met, without a wall between them. I know you didn't do it for praise, he added. But if there's one thing I have to say today, it's this: you've made me proud in a way no brand ever could. Isabelle smiled, not the smile of triumph, but of peace. Down on the street, a group of students gathered outside a newly opened fashion boutique. They wore t-shirts printed with the words "Respect is always in style," a quote from her speech. None of them knew the whole story, but they knew it was right. Online, hashtags like #Justice for Isabelle, #Clothing Without Bias, and #Laurent Legacy were trending. Days later, Le Monde published an editorial titled, "The New Power of Fashion is Righteousness," naming Isabelle as the face of a rising movement, young, composed, and uncompromising in the face of injustice. A month later, in the boutique formerly known as Belle du Soir, now renamed Maison Isabelle, a young woman with dark skin and a cheap coat walked through the door. She looked around hesitantly. A young sales associate approached her with a warm, genuine smile. Bonjour, mademoiselle. How can I help you today? Everyone is welcome here. Overhead, the new logo gleamed, a silver-stitched flower, delicate but not fragile. Isabelle wasn't there that day. She was in Berlin preparing for a global conference on invisible bias in luxury service. But in Paris, at Maison Isabelle, her story continued. Not through speeches, but through action. Through every dress sold, each one carrying a message embroidered into the lining. Respect begins with how you look at someone, not what they wear. And so, with every step a customer took, her message was carried forward. Isabelle Laurent hadn't just changed a store. She had changed how an industry looks at people. 3 months after the events at Maison Isabelle, Paris had begun its slow shift into autumn. The leaves along Saint-Honoré had turned golden, and a soft wind whispered through the old windows. The air carried a quiet nostalgia, something aged, yet filled with the promise of change. At Place Vendôme, in the Grand Hall of the European Council of Fashion Conseil Européen de la Mode, every seat was taken. The lights dimmed, cameras clicked softly, and a figure stepped onto the stage, not a designer, not a model. Isabelle Laurent. For the first time in history, a young entrepreneur, once discriminated against in a store her own family had founded, was invited to open the Equitable Fashion Summit. She stood there in a plain white blazer with no logo, black trousers, and her hair neatly tied back. No jewelry. No spectacle. Just her voice and the truth. I'm not here for a marketing campaign, Isabelle began, looking straight into the camera. I'm here because girls like me all over Europe are still being asked to leave stores for not fitting the space. I'm here because beauty has no right to decide who deserves fairness. The hall fell silent. Some nodded gently. Some placed hands over their hearts. She continued. Fashion isn't just fabric. It's how a society chooses to see each other, through eyes of respect or through inherited prejudice. And if we, the ones who shape this industry, refuse to change, we won't just be outdated. We'll be symbols of everything we once said we stood against. By the end of her speech, Isabelle was presented with the Prix d'Eloquite, the award for fashion equity, a distinction never before awarded. A week later, in a small town in Brittany, Amélie, a 13-year-old girl of North African descent, stood in front of a mirror. She was trying on a silk dress her mother had saved all summer to buy. Inside the lining was a line of golden thread. Tu mérites d'être ici. You deserve to be here. Amélie read it aloud, then smiled. In the soft golden light of the afternoon, she spun in her dress, as if the world, for the first time, was reaching out to embrace her. Isabelle Laurent didn't launch campaigns. She didn't flood the press with speeches. She rebuilt a system. From staff training programs to inclusive hiring policies to how every product was displayed, every detail at Maison Isabelle was anchored in one principle: respect. High-end boutiques across Paris began to follow suit. Not because it was trendy, but because it was time for fashion not just to be beautiful, but to be kind. And when a journalist asked Isabelle in a televised interview, "What keeps you going, even after achieving so much?" she smiled softly. "Because I was once told I didn't belong here, and I want to make sure no one else ever hears those words again." The screen faded to the image of a sign posted at the entrance of every Maison Isabelle boutique in 3 languages. All are welcome here. And truly, from that moment on, people didn't just walk into those boutiques to buy dresses. They came to be seen, and to believe that kindness, too, can become a legacy. Winter draped Paris in a delicate veil of mist. The gray sky hushed, as if listening for something about to be said. Along Avenue Montaigne, home to France's most prestigious fashion houses, a rare event was unfolding at Maison Isabelle. The announcement of a generational transition. Inside the Art Deco hall, fashion journalists, business leaders, social activists, and young students gathered, invited equally without hierarchy. On the screen at the center of the room, a message appeared. From legacy to transformation, the future begins with listening. Cameras clicked as Isabelle Laurent stepped out, this time not alone. Beside her stood Sophie Diallo, a young designer of Senegalese descent whom Isabelle had mentored after Sophie was turned away from a discriminatory fashion recruitment event. Sophie took the microphone, her voice firm yet filled with emotion. "I didn't rise from privilege, but I had someone who saw me at the exact moment I was being asked to leave. And today, I stand here, not just to design clothing, but to design a new culture." The room fell silent. Isabelle placed a hand gently on Sophie's shoulder and continued, "I'm not handing over a brand. I'm handing over a vision that diversity is not a slogan, but an operating principle." Maison Isabelle would now be co-led by a new council, composed of women, immigrants, indigenous people, LGBTQ+ representatives, and youth leaders. No one held a permanent seat. All leadership roles would rotate every 5 years. It was a model some called reckless, but no one could deny its time had come. In rural Lorraine, a 14-year-old boy named Julien had just been awarded a summer fashion internship in Paris. In his handwritten thank you letter to Maison Isabelle, he wrote in shaky penmanship, "I'm not sure I'm good enough, but I want to try," because for the first time, a big brand said they're looking for heart, not just grades. Isabelle read the letter just as she was leaving the event. In the car, she smiled and rested her hand on her phone. A message lit up from her father, Etienne Laurent. "You didn't just honor my legacy, you've surpassed it." A few days later, a short video quietly spread online. A middle-aged white woman placed a small bouquet of flowers outside the entrance of Maison Isabelle, where a sign read, "Apology is the first step toward healing." Many recognized her. Evelyn Marceau, the former customer who had once triggered the discrimination incident against Isabelle. There were no reporters, no flashing lights, just a single white daisy and a handwritten note. "I was wrong, and I'm learning to see people differently." Isabelle made no public comment. But the next morning, a new message appeared on the store's glass door. "Here, everyone deserves the right to begin again." The story of Isabelle Laurent didn't end with a runway show or a fashion scandal. It ended, or rather continued, with a legacy not wrapped in a box, nor sold with a warranty. A legacy that lived on in how we look at one another, greet each other, and respect each other. At Maison Isabelle, fashion was no longer something you wear. It was a way of being, and that truly never goes out of style. Spring returns to Paris. On the top floor of the new Maison Isabelle headquarters, the open-plan studio buzzes with color, design sketches clipped along strings, scattered drafts across tables, and mood boards alive with texture. It doesn't feel like a traditional fashion house. It feels like an artist's atelier where ideas aren't boxed in and every voice matters. Sophie Diallo, now the creative director, sits at the long wooden table with a group of interns. She doesn't teach through theory but through lived experience. Did you know, Sophie begins, her calm gaze steady, I was once rejected just because of my name. But people can reject your resume, that doesn't mean they get to reject your worth. Lin Tran, a 17-year-old girl from Vietnam, nods attentively. She's one of the first students in the Open Door program launched by Maison Isabelle, offering fashion apprenticeships to students from underserved communities. Lin raises her hand shyly. Madam Sophie, if my French isn't very good, can I still be a designer? Sophie smiles. Images don't need language. Draw and let your colors speak for you. In the hallway nearby, Isabelle Laurent watches silently. Though officially retired, she still visits every day, not to supervise, but simply to be present. In her hand is an old notebook filled with design ideas once rejected back in the 1980s for being too bold, too feminist, or not European enough. Today, she hands it to Sophie. Not to copy, Isabelle says, but to remind you that what was once dismissed can become the roots of the future. In a small room next door, Olivier Laurent, Isabelle's nephew, leads a workshop on ethical branding, how to build a brand without exploiting fear or shame. He once worked in marketing for a major fashion conglomerate, but left after a labor abuse scandal. We don't sell illusion, Olivier says calmly. We sell honesty, and we never put our customers' dignity on the price tag. At the end of the day, the entire Maison gathers in the courtyard where an olive tree was planted on the day of leadership transition. Under lantern light and soft jazz, they raised their glasses, not for profit margins, but for a rare milestone. For the first time in French fashion history, a luxury house is run as a collective, no permanent CEO, no fixed boardroom, only rotating responsibility and mutual trust. Isabelle steps into the circle. Tomorrow, I'll no longer have my own office, she laughs, eyes glistening. But I'll have a chair in the hallway to listen, to learn again. Because I believe the greatest power is when you dare to give it away. The Maison rises to applaud, not out of politeness, but as a shared affirmation of a new truth. Fashion isn't just product. It's a community that dares to redesign how the world works. Outside, a soft rain begins to fall. The olive tree stands still, a quiet witness to the growth of a generation that doesn't demand to be seen, but insists on being recognized. Maison Isabelle, no longer just a brand, but a symbol, a home, a gentle but unmistakable declaration. We are not here to please your eye. We are here to change how you see. September. Paris glows with the vibrant energy of Fashion Week. The streets around Palais Garnier are temporarily blocked, as hundreds of the fashion industry's most powerful figures gather. Rumor has it that tonight's show will be historic, not because of tailoring or trend, but because of its message. Maison Isabelle unveils for the first time its new collection, Renaissance. Not belonging, but leading. The runway isn't polished marble or sleek chrome. It's built like a miniature European square, paved in rough stone, surrounded by sculptures made of recycled paper. Every detail intentional, to erase the boundary between haute couture and real life. Music begins, not a symphony or pop remix, but the raw, unaccompanied voice of a young brown-skinned girl singing in Pearl, a West African language. Her voice is unrefined, powerful, and pure, silencing the entire room. The models emerge. No two are alike. A 70-year-old Asian woman with silver hair tied in a bun, draped in a deconstructed trench coat made from upcycled silk. A young man with a limp, walking with a wooden cane, each step a quiet victory. A petite Latinx girl with a glowing smile and barely their makeup. A 13-year-old mixed-race boy from East Africa, wearing a design he himself sketched, brought to life by Maison Isabelle. No one quite knows what the casting criteria were, but everyone feels it. They weren't chosen to represent anyone. They were chosen to represent themselves. Front row, the scene shifts. Clara Williams, once ejected from a first-class cabin, now a lead U.S. partner of Maison Isabelle, sits poised. Beside her, Sophie Diallo in a tailored amber linen suit, the woman once rejected for her unfamiliar name. And in the quieter third row, Isabelle Laurent herself. No logos, no jewels, just a black dress and a gaze full of warmth. For her, tonight isn't a media moment. It's a promise fulfilled. As the final look disappears backstage, the lights dim. A single message appears on the LED screen. We were once told we were not tall enough, not white enough, not French enough, not refined enough. But it is that very lack that has become the fabric of the future. And then, tonight, fashion didn't just walk. It stood up. The room erupts in applause. No designer's name is chanted. No celebrity is called out. All eyes remain on the stage, as if to honor every spirit that was once silenced for being different. Outside Palais Garnier, a little brown-skinned girl with curls stands next to her mother, holding a ticket to the live screening in the plaza. She tugs her mother's sleeve. "Mama, can I wear clothes like that one day?" Her mother nods, eyes glistening. "Not only wear them, sweetheart. You can design them." That night, Paris didn't sleep, because the things once rejected were finally walked, celebrated, and remembered. Maison Isabelle didn't just craft a collection. They stitched back a torn faith, using the red thread of courage. 3 months after the show in Paris, a new door opened, not on the catwalk, but in the real world. In the outskirts of Marseille, in a neighborhood once labeled as on the margins, a derelict building had been transformed into a center named L'Atelier de Demain, the creative workshop of tomorrow. The person leading the opening ceremony was none other than Clara Williams. Beside her stood Isabelle Laurent and Sophie Diallo, along with their colleagues from Maison Isabelle. There was no red carpet, no press, but hundreds of children, from different ethnicities, backgrounds, and silences, came to take part. At the very first orientation, Clara stood before the children, holding a weathered personal notebook, and said, "The day I was removed from first class, I stayed silent. Not because I was weak, but because I knew every word I could have said that day would never carry as much weight as my actions later. And today, this is that action." Isabelle followed, her voice gentle but firm. "Here, you don't learn to become laborers. You learn to become people with vision, with aesthetics, and with a place at the table. L'Atelier de Demain is not just a fashion studio. It's a space where immigrant children learn to shape on mannequins. Teenagers who dropped out of school learn to write grant proposals. Single mothers are retrained as master tailors with insurance, a salary, and a pathway to owning their own atelier. Sophie, now the program's director, personally teaches a course titled Global Aesthetic Thinking, where she emphasizes, pride in identity doesn't mean isolation. It's how you bring your voice to the global table. In December, L'Atelier held its first exhibition, titled Les Silhouettes Invisibles, The Invisible Silhouettes. The students' designs were displayed alongside their portraits and short stories. A coat made from a mother's old scarves, captioned, "I used to think I was a burden. Now I'm someone who lifts." A handcrafted shoe, shaped around the prosthetic leg of its maker, inscribed, "My body is different, but never lacking." A dress based on the scribbles of a 6-year-old girl, brought to life by the entire class as a community project. Clara stood quietly, taking in each piece. In the warm lighting, her eyes welled up, not with sadness, but with a realization. It is here, not in airport lounges or executive boardrooms, that justice is being stitched back together one thread at a time. In an interview with Le Monde, when asked, "You once said, silence can be power. So today, do you choose to stay silent or continue to speak?" Clara smiled, her gaze resting on a young boy struggling to straighten a sleeve at the end of the classroom. "I will speak, but not in words. I will speak through those the world once said had no future. They will be my loudest voice." March of the following year, in Brussels, the political capital of Europe, a major conference on social justice in consumer industries was held at the European Parliament building. On stage, amid rows of microphones and national flags, one name drew particular attention: Clara Williams, chair of Infinity Group and founder of L'Atelier de Domaine. This event was not part of Clara's media plan, but the invitation came from a place she could not refuse: the European Human Rights Commission, which had received thousands of signatures supporting the integration of racial bias education into customer service training systems. Part of that proposal was a new training program inspired by the journey of Clara Williams. Clara stepped up to the podium with no written speech, no papers. She began in a soft, unamplified voice. "I'm not here to teach a lesson. I'm here to recount something very ordinary. Once I was asked to vacate a seat, or not because I was wrong, but because I was seen wrongly." The hall fell silent. No paper rustling. No phones ringing. Clara continued, "I didn't sue. I didn't ask for an apology. But I rebuilt a system. And it started with a question. How do we ensure that my daughter and your children don't grow up feeling like they must always prove they are worthy?" She spoke of Emma, her daughter's first solo shopping trip, and how she was thrown out of a store her own father owned. She spoke of Grace, the young flight attendant who stood still that day, but later helped design the new training protocol. And she spoke of herself not as a CEO, but as a woman who had been sidelined many times simply because her silence came in a color. After the speech came the longest standing ovation the forum had seen, often criticized for being too ceremonial. In the outer hall, delegates queued to sign the petition supporting the proposed retail conduct charter, inspired by L'Atelier de Domaine. A Dutch MP told a camera, "She didn't shout. She redesigned the system, and that is how you build lasting change." That evening, Clara received a message from an unknown number. Just one line: "I heard you. No one has ever made me this quiet. Evelyn Drake." Clara did not respond. Instead, she opened an email. The proposal for opening a second L'Atelier branch, this time in Manchester, UK. She scrolled to the notes. Priority hiring. Individuals dismissed for standing up to discrimination. And she typed one new line: "We will turn every societal failure into a place for rebirth." At the press briefing's end, a young reporter asked, "What makes you believe one person can change a system?" Clara smiled. No hesitation. "I've never believed one person could do it alone. But I believe if one person has the courage not to look away, a second will join, then a third. And one day the system will change not from fear, but because there is no kinder alternative." She closed her worn notebook, nodded politely, and stepped out of the hall into the early spring light, radiant as a promise. 3 months after Brussels, Clara Williams returned to London. Not for a meeting, nor a product launch. This time, she came to inaugurate something very different: the Empathy First Training Center, the first branch of an emotional intelligence and customer service program she founded. The space was located in a renovated train station in Camden, retaining its original brick walls, steel arches, and raw industrial charm. On a large front wall in the main hall, one phrase was painted in multiple languages: "Respect is not a reaction. It is a decision." Clara gave no lengthy speech. She quietly walked through the center. A simulated conflict classroom, an experience-sharing space, a story booth, where staff recorded moments they were discriminated against or chose justice. In one small room, training was in session. Grace, now director of the training program, stood before a diverse group from hotels, restaurants, and retail. Behind her, a screen displayed a simple image: a woman standing in an airport, calm gaze forward. It was Clara, years ago. Grace asked, "Why do you think she didn't respond with anger?" A 22-year-old replied, "Because she knew. If she got angry, they wouldn't see the truth. They'd only see the rage." Grace nodded, eyes softening. And because she knew, true power doesn't lie in how loud you speak, but in choosing the right words and the right moment. Outside, Clara sat beneath a young maple tree in the courtyard. A reporter approached, hesitant. "Ms. Williams, Many call you a symbol against discrimination. Do you see yourself as a hero? Clara smiled, not proud, not evasive. I didn't save anyone. I just refused to let them treat me like I didn't exist. But you sparked a movement, the reporter said. Do you think it will grow? I don't need it to be a trend, Clara replied. I want it to become a habit. Before leaving, she paused by the trainee roster. She read each name, then stopped at one line, Evelyn D. Enrolled in listening in silence. Clara paused. Then she pulled a small note from her pocket and wrote, Not everyone gets a second chance to make it right. Use this one wisely. She folded the paper and pinned it next to Evelyn's name. That day, light rain fell in London. Clara walked out of the center without an umbrella. Rain soaked her navy blazer, but her eyes gleamed, as if she saw a near future where apologies didn't need tears, just action. A future where no one had to be worthy to be respected. And that was Clara Williams' greatest legacy. A lesson not made to be memorized, but to be lived.